Hi, my name is Mikey. This is Tyler, and we're the founders of Innovative Start Organization, a nonprofit that teaches financial literacy in underrepresented communities. So we hit on a bunch of topics. Obviously, we'll continue some of our sessions with our podcast. Please take a look at that on our channel. We do have a few episodes where we talk about some economic factors and some basic financial tips. Today, we're going to talk about mostly some economic issues related to unemployment, which has been really heavy right now within the past year or so. Some of the things that we've seen personally and just kind of like within the news itself, we'll be talking about. But yeah, and again, uh, our main goal is to inform, not persuade. So at the end of this conversation, we'll be asking for some comments between some of our subscribers and any people that come across. Just if there's anything that you've been seeing or if you've been impacted by the recent unemployment um, issue that's been happening. So one thing that we talked about to get the conversation to go is back in August, Tyler and I had a conversation about unemployment. Um, really wasn't personally seeing so much of a impact at that time. But we did have some people that we knew that were impacted by layoffs and such, and just unemployment in general. I knew people that were in the same, field as me as well that were impacted by some layoffs within accounting firms, downsizing, yada yada. So we're going to touch on a couple topics, but in that August we had that conversation. The job report that came out. Usually those come out on a monthly slash quarterly basis. And it just touched bases on like, what added jobs to the market have there been? Again, just like before we got this call going, Tyler was talking about how that can be re-edited, after it's officially counted, I guess. So it's really an estimation before they really get to like, okay, what was actually been added. Uh, One thing that I think a lot of news outlets always leave out, as far as that goes, and which can cause some misconceptions, is what industries or what occupation groups do those jobs or wherever those jobs come from or are added from. So most of the time, you'll always see from the healthcare industry the highest amount of job openings from. Most reports you'll see is going to be that main chunk. I think in that August, there was about 200 plus thousand. And most of those came from one, the healthcare industry, and then second, I think, was retail slash restaurant industry. With that being said, right, when you think of the healthcare industry, yes, there are some administrative jobs and such like that, but as it's been since COVID and even before COVID and even now, there's always a nursing shortage. So a main chunk of those are going to be from that aspect. From the retail slash restaurant industry aspect, those are those people that are within the fast food kind of aspect. So these are not really corporate positions that you're looking at, but more so some of the day-to-day people that you see within your activities. So outside of the healthcare industry part, but those are some of the things that we saw as we dive deeper into those job reports. Recently, we took a look at what is this for May. So it looks like there were about 130,000 plus jobs added within this last month. Um, and then it's also known that for March and April, they revised downward to about 95,000 positions. So this is for the past quarter, essentially, quarter being those 3 months. Just talking about the jobs added. Mind you, like I said, back in August, there was about 200,000 plus. Now we're only looking at about, and that was for that quarter. Now we're looking at about um, a 95 to 100,000 range. And again, with the majority of those being in the healthcare industry. Uh, One of the other aspects in there is hospitality. And then we also saw some declines in Fed jobs, which could also be because of the whole Doge Department of Government Efficiency that happened recently. So that's been a market shift. What people don't understand too is when there's mass layoffs or anything related to those economic downturns is that it floods the market, right? Um, Unemployment in its definition can vary. Also, states themselves um, keep their own unemployment numbers per state, and then you also see it at the whole federal level too as well. So if you're ever curious, like, oh, what's the, unemployment percentage within my state, or just as like, is it on par with like the federal average? Um, I think right now unemployment is at, what's it say, 4.4. Um, Forecast being around that range. I don't know where they get that from. I don't know how it's only 4.4. You think there's about probably 200 million, I could be off, but probably about of like working age adults. That just seems like a low number to me. Then that's only saying like a few 100,000 people are unemployed. Now, um, to get unemployment is not like just something that you get just because you don't have a job. Most employers pay into that for you to even receive that. So you just don't get unemployment just from not ever having a job. That's just not how it works. Um, Employers pay into that. It's part of like regulations and such of owning a business and operating with employees. But that's my spill on that. Tyler, did you want to add anything to that before we dive into some of the numbers here and talk about some terms too?
Yeah, I was just looking, and one thing, we say it seems low. I guess, we're coming from more of a corporate perspective, and we've seen personally quite a bit of layoffs. I have know some people personally that were part of a consulting practice, and there was over 25 new hires that were let go within the span of a week out of nowhere. It was pretty unfortunate. One thing that I was just is just really curious, and these numbers are so confusing, and I hate how confusing they are. Is like even part-time employees are counted as the labor force, which I guess to an extent is makes sense, but I think it needs to be called out maybe a little bit more, or maybe just for people to be aware of whenever we talk about employment numbers, because that's not, we all know that's not livable wages, and but also that can include people that are in high school starting out new
Yeah.
jobs, things like that, and they may not need a full-time job. Hopefully they don't. So that's just my 2 cents to call that out. Something to just keep in mind. There's so many details within
Mm,
these numbers and what we hear, the quick snippets off the news.
right. I think another thing too is if you're looking from a corporate perspective, right? I mean, you can go to college for many things, right? But we're talking about college that leads into some type of corporate job or aspect. Imagine at a point of time where you felt like you can go to college and then that's where it leads to. But I've heard of people getting their offers rescinded, start dates delayed, and just some other aspects. Uh, the main issue that, like I said, a lot of people don't think about, and again, we're talking about from a corporate perspective, not the other pieces of the job industry, but we've seen a shift in corporate America for offshoring a lot of entry level positions. So those interns or those people that are usually used to gain that experience and to help out um, within that, low level aspect of getting started within a firm or that corporate aspect. Now their job is being pushed to be offshore. So, and you say, oh, well, why would you want to offshore, yada, yada, right? For one person, they can probably hire 10 people offshore. That's like those things that you talk about when like the trade aspect and everything else and yada yada. It's just those are things that get talked about, right? Even when we look at the trade piece, with the current administration wanting to have things more in-house within the U.S., right? That comes at a higher expense for employers because here you have to pay people a lot more versus offshore, you can pay them a lot less. And the issue with that is that could be pushed off to the consumer, right? So me as a business person, and I want to make sure that I'm, raising that bottom line so we're not in the negative, we're not in the red. I'm going to look for whatever option I can to get the same product and lower my expenses, right? And that's where that's just coming from a high level perspective. What hurts with that is that those people who are getting those degrees, spending their money, taking out those loans, these 18-year-olds who don't even know, what they're doing with their life, taking out these large loans, are getting into a job market that is not certain, right? When luckily for when Tyler and I graduated was probably at, the last peak of the job market where you could probably get anything. If you didn't get an internship, it's because you weren't working hard enough or you weren't out there connecting. Now you can connect, you can do all the talking you want to, you can get on here and you can apply to every job in the world, entry level, be over experienced, anything. And at least like I said, personal stories and everything else, it's just not the same. So um, people are less likely now to job hop, which means that some of those jobs that did come open from people, hopping from one job to another are no longer there, right? Companies are hiring internally up. So then those options of, getting those entry level jobs or being somebody that can pivot into that positions are no longer there. Um, there was an article that came out about jobs that were being posted were not actually jobs that were being hired to. But there's a lot of different things that have impacted the market so far. And one of the terms I want to talk about, and one of the good, like, I guess, things that I came across during my research for this topic today, but the Phillips curve. So, Phillips curve was developed by economist A.W. Phillips in 1958, based off of some data from the UK that suggested a trade-off with, or like basically an inverse relationship with the unemployment rate and then inflation. Basically saying that you can choose between higher inflation or lower unemployment. And essentially, what we're looking at too today, and some of the things that we've talked about lately, right, is the Federal Reserve and the people who deal with, deciding what interest rates are going to be, want to keep those as low as possible, right? You don't want to, their last, option is, oh, I don't want to raise the federal rate for that interest rate. With that comes that inverse relationship. And I think when Tyler and I talked last time, what was it, like 4% for the last quarter or so when they last talked about the interest rates? It was like 4.1 or somewhere around there. Um, but what you like, those seem like low numbers in general, but that's on a quarterly basis, right? That doesn't compound essentially, right? So on average, it's about a 3.8 per year on average since we've been tracking this data. But like I said, every quarter when that comes out, that is just for that time being, as far as what do those inflation rates look like, not the Federal Reserve raise rate. So in regards to inflation, the rate of unemployment being inversely tracked to that, also the other economic factors go into that. But I'm gonna pass it off to Tyler to add in some of his points too and his perspective on that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it is interesting. Like especially since we've come to the job market, adulting during COVID, there was a lot of jobs at the tail end of that. Everybody, the tech industry was going crazy after
Mm-hmm.
the stimulus checks. I mean, the salaries I was hearing for 1, 2 year analysts were just insane to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and just a year prior to that, in 2020, like the college graduates had such a hard time finding jobs in the first place. So it's just been interesting because it's changed a lot. I mean, this Phillips curve situation is, or this, I don't know, you call it a theory, concept, I think is what you mentioned, Mikey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know, it's just been interesting from our perspective because we've had the crazy inflation after COVID, and then the labor market has dwindled down, especially after 2021, 2022, and all, the big tech layoffs, 2022, 2023, continuing to still, flow through the past year or so as well. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting situation. It's an interesting concept. I don't. I was just speaking to someone that I knew that's recruiting earlier this year, and they mentioned that there's certain jobs that have, the salaries have decreased, which I find that interesting because there's not as big of a demand right now for some talent. So that correlation now is has been very evident over the past, you know, few years that we've been in the job market working full time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, in reality, since graduating, it's only been what, 4 or 5 years being within the job market as, postgraduates. So, and in the long scheme or grand scheme, that's basically still early on entry level or associate slash senior level like. So, still at the lower end of experience versus some of the people that have been there, 10, 20 years. I would like to really hear the conversation from people who have experienced the job market during the last recession versus post pandemic, because that will really give you a perspective on, are you seeing some of the same trends within, when that was starting to hedge out versus what it looks like now. Stagflation is another thing that you can also talk about in regards to that too. But I do think with the high inflation that we experienced during the pandemic, that also was met with some increase in employment. I think it's just different. But I think also technology has also played a major, major hand, not even an invisible hand, but like a very apparent hand in as far as like how we go about stuff. Um, I don't know about you, Tyler, but like right up until I was graduating, AI was not really a thing that like people just had, easy access to as far as like an everyday tool. And even post graduating, I don't think like until like maybe 2023, I saw like a huge push into people being like, yeah, have you been using Chat? Have you heard of this? Yada yada. Like, um, I, it's crazy how it expanded so much, right? And then even when people first started getting access to Chat GPT, people were like, hey, you need to be on the curve. Like you need to be learning these AI tools. If you're like, yeah, it's not you can only do so much. It can help you write an email or figure some grammar out or maybe throw you an idea, right? And now people are using AI to just build and scale everything, marketing, project management, like anything that you need, right? Recipes and yada yada. You can, build images, right? It's coming for certain jobs and industries, and that is a huge factor, right? And then that's when we start looking at maybe the conversation around universal income, because you're going to have a huge displacement of people who are no longer able to work because technology is consumed their industry. Um, and not just because like, from a perspective of like, yeah, it's good. It's because like people will rather rely on that than pay somebody. Um, and look at like even restaurant industries too, like when McDonald's was having their first non-manned like restaurant or whatever, where you basically just came through the driveway, you ordered, and all the robots inside did everything in the hand eat your meal, right? They were trialing that. Um, and even if it's not something that you think could be, a success in that thing, and I think it came out that they did have some issues or something, the fact that they're testing that out should be a real clear indicator, not really like a scare tactic or for people to be on the edge, but like a real indicator of like what they're trying to do, right? What they're willing to do to maybe get rid of the middleman or, paying people a higher wage, right? They'll rather take the front up cost of paying for that expense to get that going if they know that they can scale that and eventually replace those people in that job market. So those are things to look out to. Always be paying attention to how technology is shaping um, your industry. One of the best resources that I learned when I worked in career services throughout undergrad is BLS.gov. Again, that's BLS.gov. Um, that they use a lot of market data to track job growth and estimations for that. So if you're a new college student, if that's something that you're deciding to do, or not even like, hey, not even college, trade, whatever it is, right? If you're getting into some type of industry and you want to see how that's going to pan out, possibly, you can most definitely take a look at BLS.gov, where they track some of those market indicators for those industries and see if there's any job growth projections within that too. That'll at least give you some type of outlook. And then also just talk to people in the industry too. They'll also be honest with you to say like, hey, like, it's a here, it's a there, or you hey pivot. College again is not for everybody, but just these like options on options on options, staying informed, everything else. But that's a really good resource that helps you so you make sure you're not wasting your time. Again, I know in a perfect world, you go to college for something that you love to do or whatever, but that's not the world right now. And adulting is going to show you that quicker than, maybe the, not the mind or mindset that you're in, essentially. So, but yeah, that's just my perspective on that. Any good pointers or anything, Tyler, from you?
Yeah, I was going to say some of this labor market data has to do with non-college type of maybe more in the
Mm-hmm.
trades. So if you're going in the trades route, you can look at that. Um, yeah, I would say like, my personal philosophy, you have to provide value.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we do, that's how the job works. You provide your value, whether that's your work ethic or your knowledge in a certain area or topic, and you get paid for that. So, maybe you have to do a job you necessarily don't love for a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and, invest. That's what we're all about, investing, setting up for the future. And then you can do something that you may not have to worry about as getting paid as much, but you love it more, if that makes sense. There's things that I want to do that don't pay, barely anything. Can't do it yet, but in the future will. So I think that's also just an important topic as we're talking jobs and such. And hey, some people don't want a job that pays much, which is
Mm-hmm.
fine, and they just live in a tiny house or something. They keep their expenses low, and that's cool too. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's all just us personally knowing what we want out of life, and it may take a few years to figure that out. I don't
Yeah.
know. That's my share.
I think it's gonna be interesting to see like I wouldn't even say next 5 years, within the next year itself, how technology slash AI is playing a role in,
100%.
the job industry, offshoring, what that's gonna look like, especially for these large corporate jobs. I think like every time I go on LinkedIn, there's like, oh, like this huge company just, downsized. Um, their firm or whatnot. So um, my fingers are crossed for everybody that's within there. It's interesting enough. I feel like over the summer, like slash like late spring is when a lot of layoffs happen. Which again, like I said, when there's mass layoffs and stuff like that, it floods the job market every single time. So um, you'll be somebody that's got laid off last year, job searching, and then now you're competing with people that just got laid off this summer, and then it's just going to keep increasing because as companies find out maybe, we don't need that person or their job is kind of redundant, I can give that extra, work to maybe a senior or another person on our staff. That is where it comes to. And then as technology plays a important role, that is where it comes to. The best thing to do is stay informed. Um, we can talk about budgeting and everything like that, but I think that's like, people have heard enough as far as like what that looks like. Even if you save up for 3 months of expenses, what, used to be what it is. Some people have been unemployed or job searching for longer than that. So it's hard to figure out what works best. Your pride could also be there too. You may feel that you have all that experience and everything else. You're like, okay, like I need this or better, but it's gonna wear you down, and you'll get to a point where like you'll just take anything, which is, you know worst case scenario. Again, heavy, heavy hitting on, at least for those people around you, especially for those younger people maybe getting into the job market or whatnot, is just to make sure that they know and stay informed so that they don't end up in certain paths that lead to um, unemployment or some type of economic uncertainty, what they're getting into within the job industry. um, staying hip to the trends of the job industry that they're looking into, or maybe that they want to pivot into. Like again, you can't always do what you want to do. Sometimes you just gotta like, pull it in together and be like, okay, like what's gonna work best for how the life that I want to live, essentially. And look at it that way. What goals do you want to have within your own personal life? And maybe you can lead into something that you want to do, afterwards. But in the current economic situation that we are in now, and maybe within the next, several months or years or who knows, It's just hard to know, and that's where all of this comes from. It's just that uncertainty of will there be, jobs for people. So, um, and again, there's other people that are like, I've had no issue. I've been able to, move this market. I don't know anybody like that. And of course, the unemployment numbers are so low where you're gonna be like, that doesn't make sense. People will say, oh, well, there was like 200,000 jobs added. What do you mean you can't find a job? Yada yada. Like that seems as like it fits within the unemployment number range. But you have to think these are jobs that either people don't have the necessary experience in, aka the healthcare field. Maybe they went to school for finance or something else. And then, or it's for a job that doesn't pay a livable wage, right? Again, there's an argument just to kind of wrap up on these points of what's a livable wage and the jobs that are worked for those and who worked those jobs. Um, as a high school student, it makes sense, right? You don't need a livable wage. You probably still live with your parent, guardian, or whatever that is. Your expenses are not as high, right? But at that same job that a high school student could work at could be an adult with a family, right? And they're getting paid the same amount, and that's just not enough, right? And it's not because of, maybe they didn't go to college or they didn't do this or right. Maybe that's within their skill set. So the argument goes a lot of ways as far as that goes, but these are the things that, like I said, that people have to like understand when that data gets put out is to do your own research, dive deeper, and understand it. A lot of people can be ignorant to the facts. So really understand, hone into it, make sure that you see what you're getting yourself into as far as like what that looks like. And like I said, always do your research, even from the things that we talked about today. Do your research on that too as well. But yeah, anything before we wrap up, Tyler?
Um, this is I always say just, well, work hard, get your foot in the door, even if you're not getting paid what you want to or have the position you do, maybe that can lead to something in the future. So always, in my opinion, provide more value than maybe what you're getting paid, and I think it'll lead to greater things in the future of your career, anyone's career.
Facts, yeah. And like I said, a second on that. Always be learning what's going on in the industry trends. If it's AI, get into it, or whatever AI tools you need, get into it, figure it out. But leave a comment. Let us know how your journey has been. If you have any personal stories or anything that you feel like could help some of the viewers out there as far as, navigating or understanding the job market, please let us know. Again, BLS.gov is a good source, doing your own research, understand the unemployment rates, what that means, understanding on economic uncertainty, and just understanding, the current administration and what they put out as far as to have those economic ties. But we appreciate you guys for watching. Tune in again next week whenever we release another episode. And like I said, again, like and subscribe. Let us know what you think in the comments. Appreciate it.